Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, after meeting during a hotel evacuation, a couple enjoys a blissful 4-year relationship. However, tensions arise when the girlfriend becomes distant after moving in together. A confrontation leads to a breakup, with the girlfriend leaving for another man. Hurt and betrayed, he ends the relationship and refuses to forgive her, ultimately cutting ties completely. Now let's get into the story. My girlfriend and I were together for 4 years. We met after both of our apartments flooded and we were put in neighboring hotel rooms. She had an upstairs apartment and I had a downstairs one. Since we were both evacuated and forced to take a little getaway, we got to talking and found it hard to turn in for the night. I invited her to hang out in my hotel room and watch a movie, so she agreed. We talked the whole time and realized we were neighbors for 2 years and just didn't cross paths very often. We might have only seen each other twice in all that time. I also learned that she was quite lonely, like me. She was recently divorced and never had children. I had a daughter that I didn't get to see very often since she lived with my ex-girlfriend. I could tell she cared about me, and it bothered her that I had a child I couldn't see very much. Once the apartments were fixed, we started visiting each other every day for one reason or another. The first time, she came over and asked for sugar. The second time, I asked for salt. She invited me in and asked if I dated. I said I wasn't very eager to be rejected by a woman I could easily love. That's the first time we made love and consequently began dating. This went super well for 2 years. We went roller skating, skiing, to the movies, to plays, to clubs, boating, and more. So much that I can't even remember, but it was a wonderful time. Then we decided she should move into my apartment to save on rent. She said she would love nothing more than to live with me and share a life together. It went really well for the first 6 months. During the last 6 months, she started to get really quiet. She didn't feel like having conversations with me anymore or telling me what was on her mind. Whenever we talked, it turned into a stupid argument. She started to treat me like I was stupid and she was always right. I continued going on walks with her, but it wasn't hand in hand like we used to walk. She would look around and create chit-chat with any neighbors and let me keep walking. She started waving at anyone that would drive by, which was more attention than even I was getting. One day when we were out, a tall man was standing outside our building smoking. I recognized him from before. I knew he lived in our building, but I didn't know his name or where he lived. My girlfriend started talking to him about his shirt that had a well-known television show on it. I stood there while she chatted away with this guy. When it seemed like long enough, I told her I was going back to the apartment, hoping it would make her come along too. She told me to go on without her. I was extremely upset by this. I said I wanted her to come along, but she just said she wanted to keep chatting with her new friend. I was highly annoyed now, but I wasn't going to leave her alone with this guy. I felt like she wanted me to let her go so that she wouldn't have to break up with me. I sat down and told her I'd wait for her. It quickly became awkward, but the conversation droned on and on. This guy was interested in her and amused that I wanted her to leave him, but she wouldn't. Finally, I had to pee, so I went into the apartment. I came back 2 minutes later, and they were gone. I started screaming her name in frustration. A different woman peeked out and recognized me. She asked if I was okay, and I asked her if she knew where the tall guy lived. She hesitated, but she said she thought he lived in 215. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I sat in front of the door until it opened 2 hours later. It was my girlfriend. She was shocked I was still waiting there and actually scolded me, saying she had enough and wanted to break up. I snapped and said if she felt that way, all she had to do was tell me, not lead me through this emotional torment. She said she was nervous to tell me, since she'd just gone to all the trouble to move in. I asked her if she was talking about all the trouble I went through to move her in. I moved the furniture she wanted downstairs, and more importantly, made room in my heart for her. I allowed myself to trust her. I told her I took her in because I believed she loved me and wanted to be with me. She rolled her eyes and said this conversation was the exact reason she'd been avoiding me and went with another man. She said I was boring, but she didn't realize it until she lived with me. We stopped going out as much, and she didn't like how much I watched television. I told her she would never be content in a relationship as long as she lives because it's about communication and improving life together. If she was bored, I didn't know that. I was living how I normally would, but with someone I loved. I felt like everything was fine. Instead of fixing the beautiful start we had, she doubted me. I told her to find another place to stay tonight, so she knocked on AP's door and he let her in. I was infuriated. I went inside my apartment and started carelessly bundling up all of her junk. I know I broke at least 2 things, but I didn't care. Let that be a representation of what she did to my heart. I had her stuff by my front door, but I wasn't sure if I should throw it away. All I could think about for the next 3 days was that I was going to have a hard time trusting anyone else, ever. That evening, she knocked on my door. I answered it and started putting her stuff just outside the door. While I did this, she sheepishly asked if she could stay in the apartment tonight. She was embarrassed to admit that AP didn't want her to stay in the apartment anymore. I laughed and slammed the door. I proceeded to watch her take all her stuff to the parking lot and sit on the curb. She waited a long time before someone came to pick her up. I assumed it was a member of her family that I never met, since she seemed to be expecting them, and they helped her get her stuff into the vehicle. I haven't seen her since. Since then, she's reached out to me a few times pleading for forgiveness, by just ignoring it. As far as I'm concerned, she's history. Today's second story. In this story, Opie recalls his marriage to a once respectable wife, whose behavior inexplicably changes. Despite attempts to communicate, she becomes distant and disinterested, eventually leaving for her father's. Discovering her journal, he learns of her affair and deceit, leading to his decision to end the relationship and expose her infidelity to her employer. Her desperate attempts to return home are met with rejection, revealing her lover's refusal to accommodate her. Ultimately, he finds relief in her rejection by her lover, solidifying his decision to end the relationship. Now let's get into the story. My wife was someone I considered to be very respectable and old-fashioned. She worked hard and only had one boyfriend before she met me. We got married when she was 23 and I was 26 while we were together. I never would have imagined us breaking up, but our marriage only lasted for 3 short years. She was a claims adjuster for an insurance company, and there were a few occasions when she taped the train to start her days out. My wife really enjoyed her job, but she didn't like the train days. That is, until she told me otherwise. For some reason, like the flip of a switch, she started to love the train. I asked how that was possible, and she just shrugged and said it felt like an adventure. In the past, she was always freaked out about so many people being packed together. She was claustrophobic and enjoyed her personal space. She swore somebody intentionally touched her but one time, but she couldn't prove it, so her sudden enjoyment of the train ride was odd. And then she started zoning out when we did meaningful things together. My wife liked to do Sudoku and word puzzles with a pen and paper, and that's also how she journaled. She would journal every night before we went to bed, and one night she started writing after we had an argument. I didn't appreciate her obvious disinterest in anything we did together before this. We had great face-to-face communication, but now she wouldn't look at me as much. She just denied what I was seeing and wrote angrily in her journal. She trusted me not to read it because it was just her way of cooling down and keeping herself in check. But I was desperate for a clue. She knew how important communication was, and now that she was refusing to do it, something wrong. She tried to say that I was the one freaking out about nothing, and she actually convinced me I was being too hard on her. She said she was just exhausted from work. So our life and relationship continued on for the next 4 months without us communicating the way we usually did. I felt like I was living with a roommate. not my wife. We still did things together, but she was somewhere else mentally. I tried a few more times to talk to her about what I was feeling, but she started to groan loudly anytime she realized that's what I was going to say. She said if I kept making her feel bad for working hard and just living life with me, she would stay at her dad's for a few days. I never wanted her to leave. I wanted her to come back to me the way she used to be. I missed her, so whenever she brought up leaving, I changed the subject because I didn't want to ruin the relationship I was trying to get back. Little did I know, it was already gone. She finally left for her dad's. She said it was only for a few days, but I had a bad feeling something was going to happen. I decided to read her journal because she forgot it at her house. I instantly regretted all the trust one put in her and waiting so long to read it. I was reading starting from the most recent, so her entries were full of annoyance towards me, and she quickly referred to another time she went to AP's house for a quickie during her work route. She wrote a pros and cons list about me and AP, concluding that he was better than me in several ways. She mentioned the train rides her and AP took together, and some of the entries were while she sat on the train beside him. There were some tic-tac-toe and hangman games on the pages. Needless to say, all of this pissed me off for a number of reasons. In the pros and cons list, she didn't mention that I was paying her mortgage, which should certainly be a pro for me, right? She didn't mention how I continually tried communicating with her or how patient I was, even though she obviously put me on a back burner. She didn't mention that I started doing extra work around the house or that she hadn't done laundry or dishes in months. She was comparing me to some stranger she just happened to become friends with on the train. This guy was somehow at my level or beyond, according to her. Even though I was the one that was dedicated and loyal to her, I chose to marry her. And we were together for 6 years total. At this point, if she thought this loser was worth leaving me for, I was going to make her follow through with it because she was going to see how wrong she was. I went to Lowe's the next day while she was still at her dad's house and changed our locks. I told her dad not to let her come home, but he was confused because she wasn't at his house. That just made my mission even more clear. So told him if she heard from her to let her know she lost a good man. He actually said he was sorry to hear that and wanted to know more. I told him all that I found out and he was really blown away and disappointed. He said I had his word not to let her move back in or help her out because she didn't need to treat me like this. He said he raised her to be respectable to men and behave like a lady. She should know that if there were any relationship problems, she could go to her father, not cheat on me. What bums me out is that she really was a lady. The way he described for the 6 years I was with her before she met this guy and let him mess up her head. She called me right after this and asked if I was ready to let things go back to normal, like the issue between us was my fault. I told her I wasn't, and I actually never would be. I told her things couldn't go back to normal because she cheated on me. I heard her drop her phone. When she picked it back up, she asked what I was talking about. I said I read her journal. I didn't tell her. I took a picture of her entry regarding the extra stops she made for personal pleasure while on the clock. I already emailed it to her company's HR, along with her employee badge number and text explaining the situation and why I was so sure this was true. She was freaking out even without knowing she could lose her job. She was telling me she wasn't ready to lose me and her journal meant nothing. It was full of lies and daydreams that she wrote down to practice her handwriting, but for no other reason. I told her I wasn't going to forgive her for this or believe her entries. She was going to live out what she daydreamed and acted on. She showed up at the house and realized she couldn't get in, so she called her dad. In a panic, she said I cheated on her and she needed to move back in. After a pause, she started sobbing really loud, screaming in frustration too. The neighbors started coming out and one actually came into the yard to ask her if she was okay. She was embarrassed, so if she got back in her car with her dad on the phone and drove away, I know she slept in our shed that night. After she tried calling me 20 times from her car, I watched her from the window while she carried blankets back there. Then in the morning, she started pounding on the door with new determination because she found out she was fired and she had to go to the bathroom. I mockingly asked her why she didn't just go to AP for support. She was afraid he wasn't ready for her to move in and a request would scare him away. She expected to be able to take advantage of me while she got to know him better. You have no idea how relieved I am that her plan didn't work out. I dared her to ask him while she stood in our yard. So she did, and it was painful to watch at first. She just asked if she could come stay for a while, and he said no. I started laughing while she explained that he was her only option because she was being kicked out by her husband for seeing him. He still said no. That guy knew what he wanted in life, and he didn't want her.